How can you
The
just
Apache
sit there?
girl
We
cried.
both know
"You
what's
saw
coming if you
everything.
don't
Take
move. I am
responsibility."
trying to
The
save
rancher
you, whether you
insisted
like
he
it or
only
not.
helped. Her small house sat on the edge of the town, close enough to hear the soft hum of neighbors' voices, but far enough that the desert felt like her own playground. She had grown up exploring the wide stretches of sand, the rocky cliffs, and the hidden trails that wound around the hills. Leela loved the quiet and the freedom it gave her. The desert was not only her home, it was where she felt most alive. She could wander for hours, her feet kicking up small clouds of dust, listening to the wind whisper through the cactus and mesquite trees, feeling as though she and the desert were in conversation. Her family, Apache through and through, had taught her from a young age to be observant, careful, and brave. Her grandmother often reminded her, "The desert sees everything. You must always see too." Leela carried these words in her heart, always watching and remembering what she saw. Her father worked long hours on a nearby farm, and her mother spent her days weaving and tending to their small garden. Leela often went out alone, partly because she liked the independence and partly because it allowed her to discover things others might miss. Not far from Leela's home was the Dalton Ranch. Mr. Dalton, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to notice everything, ran the ranch. He was respected in the town for being strong, capable, and willing to help in emergencies. People often said he had a good heart, though some whispered that he could be stubborn and set in his ways. Leela had always been curious about the ranch and about Mr. Dalton. She watched him sometimes from a distance, seeing him work with the cattle, fixing fences, or riding across the hills on his horse. She noticed the care he gave the animals, the firmness with which he handled his workers, and the way his presence seemed to dominate the open land. One late afternoon, the sky began to turn soft shades of orange and pink. Leela had wandered farther than usual, following a trail that led to a steep ridge above the valley. She loved this place because it gave her a wide view of the desert, and she could see for miles, the town looking small, almost like a model village. As she climbed a small hill, she heard the faint sound of distressed animals. Curious and cautious, she crept closer, keeping herself hidden behind a cluster of rocks. There, at the edge of the cliff, she saw a young calf struggling. Its legs were tangled in thorny bushes, and it was bleeding loudly. Leela's heart jumped. The calf could fall at any moment if it panicked. She also noticed Mr. Dalton standing a few feet away. He was holding a rope, looking carefully at the animal. Leela watched silently, trying to understand what was happening. Was he helping? Was he trying to save the calf from the edge? Something about the way he moved seemed careful but tense, and she could not see every detail from where she stood. Her curiosity grew, and she moved slightly to get a better view. Her foot slipped on a loose rock, and the small noise made the calf freeze. Leela's stomach tightened. She felt as though she was holding her breath along with the animal. She could see the muscles in the calf's legs trembling, the sharp branches scratching its skin. She also noticed that Mr. Dalton's face was serious, almost grim. He was bending down, reaching toward the calf, but he didn't speak. He seemed focused, determined. Leela could not tell if the calf would be safe or if it would fall. For several long minutes, nothing moved except the wind in the dry grass and the occasional bleat of the frightened calf. Leela's heart raced. She had never been so close to a moment like this. In those moments, she felt like she was witnessing something very important. Her mind raced with questions. Would the calf survive? Was Mr. Dalton helping it properly? Could someone get hurt? The tension was so high she could feel it in her chest, each heartbeat loud and clear in her ears. Finally, the calf managed to free one leg, and with careful movements it stepped back from the edge. Mr. Dalton finally spoke in a low voice, muttering something to calm the calf. Leela could not hear the exact words, but the tone was soft, different from the harshness she had sometimes seen in men working with animals. Slowly, the calf moved to safer ground. Mr. Dalton untangled the rope and patted it gently. Leela exhaled, relief washing over her. For a moment, everything seemed calm again. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert, Leela turned to head home. Her mind replayed the scene over and over. She knew she had seen something significant, though she could not fully understand all the details. Something about the moment stayed with her: the fear, the tension, the quiet courage of the rancher, and the vulnerability of the animal. She realized that sometimes life gave moments that required careful watching, attention, and memory. Walking back, she felt a mixture of admiration and unease. Mr. Dalton had seemed helpful, but there was something she could not shake, a question about what had really happened in those few critical minutes. She could feel the weight of responsibility, even as a young girl. She wondered if anyone else had seen the moment as clearly as she had. Most people walked by the ranch every day without noticing much, but Leela had been there, seeing the struggle and the fear. By the time she reached her home, the sky had turned deep orange and purple. Her parents were inside, calling for her to wash up for dinner. Leela nodded and smiled, but her mind was still on the events of the afternoon. She knew she would dream about the cliff, the calf, and the quiet seriousness of Mr. Dalton. That night, lying on her bed, she thought about responsibility. She remembered her grandmother's words: "The desert sees everything. You must always see too." The words now had a new meaning. Seeing was not just noticing. It was remembering, understanding, and one day speaking the truth. Leela also thought about courage. It was easy to run away from dangerous moments or pretend not to notice. But courage, she realized, meant paying attention, even when it scared her. She felt proud that she had been there, watching carefully, even if no one else had noticed. She understood that sometimes the smallest witness could hold the most important truth. The next morning, Leela awoke to the smell of fresh bread and coffee. She looked out the window at the vast desert, the cliffs, and the ranches. The world seemed quiet again, almost ordinary, but she knew the events of yesterday had changed something in her. She felt more aware, more alert to the small details of life, the struggles hidden beneath the surface, and the actions of people around her. Leela spent the day helping her mother in the garden and later walking along the edges of the town. She could not stop thinking about Mr. Dalton, the calf, and the cliff. She realized that life was filled with moments like this, small, tense, yet powerful, moments that asked people to pay attention, to take responsibility, and to act. She promised herself that she would remember what she had seen and use that memory wisely when the time came. Even though she was young, Leela felt a sense of maturity. The desert had given her another lesson. Seeing was only the first step. Understanding and acting were what really mattered. And somewhere, in the quiet hills and ranches of her town, Mr. Dalton continued his work, unaware of the young girl who had witnessed that tense afternoon, a girl who was learning what it meant to notice, to feel, and perhaps, one day, to speak the truth. The day after the incident, Leela could not stop thinking about what she had seen. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the calf struggling at the cliff, the way its legs tangled in the thorny bushes, and the sharpness of Mr. Dalton's movements as he tried to untangle it. She wondered whether she had really understood everything. Her mind kept replaying the scene, questioning what was intentional, what was accident, and what was beyond anyone's control. Leela felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride because she had been brave enough to watch and pay attention. Fear because she realized that sometimes seeing came with responsibility, responsibility to speak up or act when the truth mattered. At school, she found it hard to focus. Her teachers spoke of math problems and history lessons, but Leela's mind was elsewhere. She kept imagining what might have happened if the calf had fallen, or if Mr. Dalton had not been there. She wondered whether anyone else had noticed, and if they had, why they had said nothing. Leela could not bring herself to ask her classmates. They either lived far from the ranch or were too young to understand the tension of such moments. She realized she was alone with what she had witnessed, and the thought made her feel both important and frightened. After school, Leela walked toward the edge of town, near the ranch. She wanted to see if anything had changed, if the calf was safe, and if Mr. Dalton was working as usual. The ranch looked calm, almost normal, but she could still feel the weight of yesterday's incident pressing in her chest. As she approached the fence, she noticed the rancher moving among the cattle. He was speaking quietly to a worker, pointing toward the pens and occasionally glancing at the hills. He seemed busy, calm, almost indifferent to the tension that lingered in Leela's mind. She realized then that people often went on with life as if nothing had happened, but some moments, small or large, stayed with certain people forever. Suddenly, Leela caught sight of the calf. It was grazing near the pen, looking unharmed, its small legs moving carefully but without fear. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was mixed with confusion. Something about the calf's behavior made her pause. It was calmer now, but the way it moved suggested it remembered the fear. Leela understood then that even when danger passed, its memory remained. She wondered if the same would be true for the people involved. Would Mr. Dalton remember the tension? Would he feel the same weight she did? She shook her head, feeling the complexity of human nature and the way people handled responsibility differently. Later that evening, Leela's mother called her inside for dinner. Her father was home, tired from the fields, and her grandmother had placed a small pot of tea on the table. They talked about ordinary things, the weather, the crops, the plans for the next day, but Leela's mind kept returning to the ranch. She thought about the way Mr. Dalton had moved, the tension in his arms as he untangled the calf, and the look in his eyes that seemed serious, almost heavy with thought. She wondered whether he knew how close disaster had come or if he was completely unaware of the danger. Leela decided she needed to understand more, to know the truth of what had happened. The next morning, she walked toward the ranch again. This time, she tried to see if she could speak with Mr. Dalton without being noticed by the workers or the other townspeople. When she arrived, she saw him working alone near a fence. She watched as he repaired broken wood, his hands skillful and sure. His movements were confident, yet Leela sensed a tension under the surface, something she could not fully identify. She stayed hidden for a few minutes, observing him. He paused, looked toward the cliffs, and then returned to his work. Leela's heart raced. Did he remember yesterday's incident? Was he thinking about it? She had no way of knowing, but she felt certain that what she had witnessed could not be ignored. Days passed, and the story of the incident quietly spread through the town. Some people spoke in whispers about the calf, praising Mr. Dalton for his bravery. Others hinted that accidents could happen anywhere, and that he had probably done everything possible. Leela listened to these conversations carefully. She noticed how people tended to interpret events in ways that made them comfortable. Some ignored the possibility of mistakes, some excused what could have been serious, and only a few thought about accountability. Leela felt a strange mix of frustration and determination. She knew what she had seen, even if others did not, and she began to feel a strong urge to make sure the truth was understood. One afternoon, she finally gathered the courage to approach Mr. Dalton. She walked up to him slowly, unsure if she should speak or retreat. He looked up from his work, surprised to see her standing there. Leela's palms were sweaty and her heart beat quickly, but she forced herself to speak. "Mr. Dalton," she began, her voice steady though quiet, "I saw what happened with the calf. You need to take responsibility." The rancher looked at her with a calm, almost unreadable expression. "I only helped," he replied simply. His tone was firm yet not harsh. Leela felt a rush of emotion, anger, frustration, and a strange sense of fear. How could he say that when she knew the truth? She wanted to shout, to demand more, but something in his steady gaze made her pause. She realized that confronting someone like him required courage, patience, and careful words. Over the next several days, Leela observed Mr. Dalton more closely. She saw him interact with the workers, with the animals, and with the townspeople. He helped wherever he could, giving advice, fixing fences, and guiding the younger ranch hands. Yet, despite his helpfulness, Leela could not ignore the memory of the calf and the cliff. She felt the weight of her knowledge pressing down, reminding her that seeing was not enough. She needed to find a way to make him understand that being a witness meant more than remembering. It meant speaking up, ensuring accountability, and accepting responsibility when necessary. As tension grew in Leela's mind, she noticed subtle changes in the town as well. People began to whisper more about responsibility, about accidents, and about the line between helping and causing harm. Some villagers started paying closer attention to their own actions, while others defended the rancher without question. Leela realized that the incident had sparked a small wave of awareness, even if most people did not fully understand it. She felt both anxious and proud. She was learning that truth and accountability were not always easy to confront, especially in a community that respected power and authority. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, Leela found herself standing on a small hill overlooking the ranch. She thought about the calf, the cliff, and Mr. Dalton. The memories were vivid and detailed in her mind. She realized that sometimes seeing and remembering were only the first steps. Acting on what she had witnessed, speaking up when it mattered, and ensuring that truth was recognized were the hardest but most important steps. Leela understood that courage was not about confrontation alone. It was about persistence, clarity, and moral conviction. That night, lying in bed, she reflected on the days that had passed. She felt a mixture of fear, determination, and responsibility. She knew she had a role in what was unfolding, even if it was small. She had seen something important, and it was her duty to ensure that it was acknowledged. Leela also understood that people often resisted truth, especially when it challenged their assumptions or their sense of safety. The town, the rancher, and even her own family might react in ways she did not expect. Yet she knew she could not stay silent. In the following days, Leela prepared herself. She thought carefully about what she had seen, how she could describe it accurately, and how she could speak to Mr. Dalton and others in the town. She realized that honesty, clarity, and courage were essential. At the same time, she remained observant, watching the ranch, the animals, and the rancher closely. She noticed small details, the way Mr. Dalton moved, the subtle expressions on his face, and the way others reacted to him. Every observation added to her understanding, shaping the words she would one day say and the actions she would take. Through it all, Leela grew stronger in her own way. The incident had forced her to confront complex emotions, fear, responsibility, doubt, and courage all at once. She realized that life was filled with moments like this, moments that demanded attention, clarity, and moral judgment. And while she was only a young girl, she understood that her observations, her memory, and her willingness to act gave her power. The desert had taught her another lesson. Seeing was only the beginning. Understanding, remembering, and speaking the truth were the steps that followed. Days passed, and the tension in Leela's mind grew stronger. The image of the calf near the cliff refused to leave her thoughts. She remembered the trembling legs, the fearful eyes, and the sharp branches that had scratched the animal. More than that, she remembered the look in Mr. Dalton's eyes, focused, serious, and calm, yet carrying a weight she could not fully understand. She felt that weight too, heavy on her small shoulders. Every time she tried to talk to anyone about it, her words felt small or incomplete. Some adults dismissed her concerns politely, while others simply said, "He was only helping. Don't worry about it." But Leela knew that seeing meant more than ignoring. It meant remembering, questioning, and sometimes confronting. One afternoon, Leela gathered her courage and decided she could no longer remain silent. She walked toward the ranch, her steps slow but steady. Her mind raced with questions. How would she speak to Mr. Dalton? Would he listen? Would he even understand the seriousness of what had happened? Her heart pounded with fear, but she felt a stronger emotion underneath: determination. She had seen something important, and she knew it could not be forgotten or ignored. As she approached the ranch, she saw Mr. Dalton working near the pens, repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. His strong arms moved easily over the wood, and his eyes occasionally scanned the fields. Leela stayed hidden at first, watching him carefully, studying his movements and trying to decide the right moment to speak. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the desert. The quiet of the evening made her more aware of every sound: the soft creak of the fence, the distant calls of the animals, and the whisper of the wind through the brush. Finally, Leela stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton," she called, her voice small but firm. The rancher looked up, his expression neutral. "I need to talk to you," she said, her hands clenching slightly. He nodded, setting aside the tools, and gestured for her to come closer. The space between them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Leela's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to speak. "I saw what happened with the calf," she began. "You saw everything too. You have to take responsibility." Mr. Dalton's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. He paused for a moment, then said simply, "I only helped. That's all I did." His words were calm, but they carried the weight of authority and experience. Leela's frustration surged. How could he say that when she knew the truth? She felt a rush of emotions: anger, fear, confusion, but she forced herself to remain composed. "It wasn't just helping," she said. "The calf was in danger. You were there. You know what almost happened. You have to admit it, not just say you helped." The rancher's expression did not change, but Leela noticed a small shift in his posture, a subtle tension in his shoulders. He remained silent for a moment, considering her words. Then he spoke, his voice quieter this time. "I tried to keep it safe. That's what I always do. But accidents happen, and sometimes things go wrong even when we mean to help." Leela listened carefully. She realized that he was trying to justify his actions without admitting any fault. Her determination hardened. She understood that the confrontation would not be simple. He would not easily accept responsibility, but she could not back down. "I know you were trying to help," she said, choosing her words carefully, "but helping isn't enough. When something could go wrong, you have to take responsibility for it. You saw everything. You can't just say you helped and leave it at that. Someone could have been hurt. The calf could have fallen, and it might have been worse than we think." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on his. The rancher sighed, a long, deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of the desert itself. He looked out over the fields, then back at Leela. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Most people your age wouldn't say what you just said, but you have to understand something. Life is full of moments where we do what we can, and sometimes that's all there is. Not every moment has a clear right or wrong. I did what I thought was best for the calf, and I did it carefully. That's the truth." Leela shook her head, refusing to accept the simplicity of his answer. "Truth isn't just about intentions," she said. "It's about what actually happens and who is affected. You can't ignore what could have gone wrong. You can't just hide behind saying you were helping. I saw it. I know what almost happened. And if you don't take responsibility, no one will learn, and the same thing could happen again. You have to face it." For a long time they stood in silence. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. Leela could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge between them. She realized that confrontation was not only about words, but about courage, persistence, and the willingness to be honest even when it was uncomfortable. She felt her heart pounding, but she also felt a strange sense of clarity. She was no longer just a witness, she was a voice, a reminder that truth needed to be acknowledged. Finally, Mr. Dalton spoke again, his voice quieter, more reflective. "You've thought a lot about this," he said. "I can see that. Most people would have let it go. But you're right about one thing. What happens matters. I can't change the past and accidents happen, but I can recognize when my actions affect others. I can't undo the fear the calf felt, and I can't undo the tension of that moment. But I can acknowledge it and learn from it. Leela listened carefully, feeling a cautious hope. His words were not a full admission, but they were a beginning. The rancher looked at her with a steady gaze. "You've got courage," he said. "I respect that. Not many people your age would confront me the way you did. Maybe that's what responsibility looks like, seeing what's wrong and speaking up, even when it's hard." Leela felt a small smile form on her face. She realized that confrontation was not about winning or proving someone wrong. It was about creating understanding, holding people accountable, and learning from the moment. Over the next few days, Leela noticed subtle changes in the rancher. He continued his work, but he seemed more thoughtful, pausing to check on the animals and the fences more carefully than before. He interacted with the workers in a way that suggested he was considering the impact of his actions more deeply. Leela felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her words had made a difference, even if small. She understood that change was often gradual, but it started with courage and honesty. Meanwhile, the town began to talk quietly about what had happened. Some people whispered about the incident, praising Mr. Dalton for his bravery, while others noted that accidents could happen and that responsibility was complex. Leela listened carefully, realizing that her own observations and actions had sparked reflection in the community. She felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had seen something important and she had spoken up. That was a victory, even if the full truth was still unfolding. One evening, Leela stood on the ridge overlooking the desert, the same place where she had first watched the calf struggle. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. She remembered the fear, the tension, and the determination she had felt during that moment. She also thought about Mr. Dalton, about his calm strength and his willingness to listen, even if only partially. She realized that confrontation was never simple, but it was necessary. It was about courage, clarity, and persistence. Leela knew that life would continue to bring challenges, moments where truth and responsibility would be tested. She understood that witnessing was only the first step, that speaking up required bravery, and that real change took time. The desert had taught her lessons about observation, courage, and integrity, and this confrontation had added new layers, lessons about human nature, accountability, and the power of one voice to make a difference. That night, as she lay in bed, Leela felt a mixture of relief and determination. She knew that the confrontation with Mr. Dalton was not the end but the beginning. She had learned that even in a quiet town, even in a seemingly ordinary moment, the truth mattered, and taking responsibility was never simple. She promised herself that she would continue to see, to remember, and to speak when necessary. The desert around her was quiet, but she knew that the lessons it had taught her would echo forever, guiding her actions and her choices in the days to come. After Leela's confrontation with Mr. Dalton, the small town began to feel different. Though life seemed normal on the surface, whispers followed her through the streets in the market and around the town square. People spoke quietly about what had happened at the ranch, some praising Mr. Dalton's quick action to save the calf, while others questioned whether he had done enough or whether his intentions truly matched his actions. Leela noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The town that had always seemed calm and orderly now felt alive with judgment, curiosity, and tension. Leela's parents noticed her quiet mood at home. She was no longer the carefree girl who wandered the desert without a care. She had grown serious, thoughtful, and observant in ways they had not seen before. Her mother asked her one evening, "Are you worried about the rancher or about what people are saying?" Leela shook her head. "Neither," she said slowly. "I'm worried about the truth. I know what I saw and I want people to understand it too." Her father nodded silently, respecting her determination, even if he did not fully understand the weight she carried. At the ranch, Mr. Dalton noticed subtle changes too. Some workers spoke more cautiously around him, occasionally glancing toward the cliffs where the calf incident had occurred. The older ranch hands, who had seen many things over the years, nodded knowingly, as if they understood that the past few days had shifted the balance of awareness. Mr. Dalton himself felt a quiet reflection growing inside him. Though he had insisted that he only helped, he began to realize that intentions were not enough. Actions had consequences, and witnesses, even young ones like Leela, could make people see the truth in ways they could not ignore. One morning, Leela walked to the town square. She noticed that a small group of villagers had gathered, talking quietly and pointing toward the ranch. She listened carefully, realizing that they were discussing the incident and the idea of responsibility. Some praised Mr. Dalton's bravery, while others suggested that even brave actions could have unintended results. Leela realized that the town was slowly learning a lesson about accountability. It was not about shame or punishment. It was about understanding the impact of actions and choices. Feeling a mix of curiosity and determination, Leela approached a few villagers. "I was there," she said softly. "I saw what happened with the calf. You should know the truth." Some looked at her with surprise, others with admiration. The words she spoke were simple, yet they carried weight. People began to think carefully about what she had witnessed and what she was saying. Slowly, her courage began to ripple through the crowd, sparking quiet reflection and discussion. The story of the incident traveled in small waves through the community. Teachers mentioned it carefully to students, using it as an example of observation, responsibility, and courage. Local shopkeepers discussed it quietly with neighbors, sharing opinions and interpretations. Some families spoke with their children about the importance of paying attention and standing up for what is right. Leela realized that her actions had started a small shift in how people thought about truth and responsibility. She felt a quiet sense of pride, but also a deeper understanding that change was never immediate or easy. Meanwhile, Mr. Dalton noticed the subtle changes in the community. Some villagers now looked at him with new awareness, their conversations occasionally trailing toward him even when he was nearby. He began to see that his actions, even when meant to help, had consequences that extended beyond the immediate moment. Slowly, he started to reflect on the way he approached responsibility and the role he played as a figure of authority in the town. He realized that courage and leadership were not only about helping in emergencies, but also about accepting accountability for what could have happened and learning from the experiences. One evening, Leela and her grandmother sat outside on the porch, looking toward the desert. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. "You've done something important," her grandmother said quietly. "You've made people notice. Sometimes that is the hardest part of all." Leela nodded, feeling the weight of the days that had passed. She understood that courage was not just about confronting one person. It was about influencing a community, shaping the way people saw responsibility, and reminding them that truth mattered. As the days went by, Leela continued to observe the town. She noticed how conversations changed subtly. People were more thoughtful about their actions and the words they spoke. Workers at the ranch were more careful, double-checking tasks and communicating clearly with one another. Even the younger children in the town seemed to pay more attention to small details, learning lessons about awareness and responsibility without being told directly. Leela understood that small acts of observation, honesty, and courage could ripple outward, affecting more than just the immediate moment. One afternoon, a neighbor approached Leela. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "Most adults would not have spoken up like you did. You reminded all of us that seeing is not enough. We have to understand and act." Leela felt a mix of pride and humility. She realized that her actions, though small in the grand scheme, had sparked awareness and reflection. It was a lesson that life sometimes required observation and courage from those who were willing to pay attention, even when others looked the other way. The story also began to influence the way people viewed Mr. Dalton. He continued his work on the ranch, strong and capable, yet more thoughtful than before. People noticed the change in his approach, how he paused to consider the impact of his actions, and how he treated his workers and the animals with more care. Leela understood that accountability was not about punishment or blame. It was about learning, reflection, and taking responsibility for the consequences of one's actions. Even someone as experienced and respected as Mr. Dalton could grow and change when confronted with truth and courage. Over time, the town slowly returned to its routine, but the lessons of the incident remained. Leela noticed how people spoke more carefully, observed more closely, and considered the impact of their actions. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her courage had sparked this change, even if only in small ways. The town was not perfect, and mistakes still happened, but awareness had grown. Leela realized that truth, responsibility, and courage were not just abstract ideas. They were lived experiences that shaped the community, even in subtle and quiet ways. One evening, standing on the ridge overlooking the desert, Leela reflected on the past few weeks. The cliffs, the ranch, the calf, and Mr. Dalton's presence all felt different now. The desert itself seemed to hold a sense of calm understanding, as if it had witnessed the growth of courage, accountability, and awareness in the hearts of its people. Leela felt a deep connection to the land, to the town, and to the lesson she had learned, that speaking up, observing carefully, and insisting on truth could create change, even in unexpected ways. As night fell, the town grew quiet, but Leela's mind was full of thoughts. She thought about the responsibility of witnesses, the importance of courage, and the power of honesty. She understood that confronting a moment of truth could influence not just one person, but an entire community. She knew that her actions had sparked awareness, reflection, and change, and that those lessons would continue to guide her, the rancher, and the townspeople for a long time. The days continued, and the town slowly adjusted to the new understanding. Conversations about responsibility became more common, and people were careful to observe, think, and act thoughtfully. Leela realized that change was often quiet, subtle, and gradual, but it was real. She felt proud of herself, not for confrontation alone, but for her courage to insist on truth and accountability. The desert had once again taught her a lesson about awareness, courage, and the impact of small actions on a larger world. Through all of this, Mr. Dalton began to reflect more deeply on his own role. Though he had initially insisted he only helped, he started to understand the power of being seen and witnessed. He realized that intentions alone were not enough, that awareness, accountability, and reflection mattered. He began to change quietly, acting with more care, listening more attentively, and thinking more deeply about the consequences of his choices. Leela watched these changes, realizing that true courage sometimes inspired growth in others, even those who seemed unshakable. By the end of Part 4, Leela had learned that speaking up and insisting on truth could ripple through a community in ways she had never imagined. Her observations, courage, and persistence had created awareness, reflection, and change. The town, the rancher, and even the young girl herself had been transformed by the simple act of witnessing and insisting on responsibility. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she was now more confident in her ability to face them with honesty, courage, and awareness. The days following the community's quiet shift in awareness felt different for Leela. Life continued in the desert town, but the air now carried a subtle change, an unspoken understanding that truth, courage, and responsibility mattered. Leela walked through the streets with a lighter step, though her thoughts remained reflective. She remembered the moments at the cliff, the calf struggling, and her confrontation with Mr. Dalton. Those moments had shaped her, teaching lessons that no ordinary day could provide. She realized that witnessing, observing, and speaking up had consequences, not just for herself but for others as well. At home, her parents noticed the maturity in Leela's eyes. She no longer skipped about carelessly or wandered aimlessly through the desert. Instead, she walked with purpose, her senses alert to her surroundings. Her mother once asked, "Do you still think about the calf and the rancher?" Leela nodded. "Yes," she said, "but it's not just about them. It's about understanding what responsibility really means. It's about seeing clearly and doing what's right." Her parents smiled quietly, recognizing the depth of her words and the wisdom she had gained at such a young age. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Mr. Dalton began to act with a quiet reflection. He continued his daily work, tending to the cattle, fixing fences, and guiding his workers, but there was a subtle change in his approach. He paused more often to consider the consequences of his actions. He spoke gently with the younger ranch hands, explaining why care and caution were important. When he looked at the animals, he did so with a thoughtful presence, aware that even small moments could carry significant weight. Leela noticed these changes from afar, a small smile forming on her face as she realized that truth and courage had inspired growth in someone she had once seen as unshakable. The town itself seemed to breathe differently. Conversations shifted from idle gossip to thoughtful discussions. Neighbors spoke about responsibility, careful observation, and learning from mistakes. Teachers used the incident as an example for their students, illustrating how paying attention and speaking up could influence a community. Even younger children began to notice small details in their daily lives, learning that their actions had meaning and that being observant could make a difference. Leela understood that change often began quietly, with small acts of courage, reflection, and honesty. One afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Leela found herself at the edge of the desert, looking toward the cliffs where the calf had struggled. She remembered the fear in the animal's eyes, the tension in Mr. Dalton's movements, and the weight of the moment she had carried for so many days. She understood now that those minutes had been more than a simple accident. They had been a test of observation, courage, and moral responsibility. She realized that moments like these shaped people, teaching lessons about integrity, accountability, and the power of one voice to influence others. Leela also reflected on her own growth. She had learned that courage was not just about speaking loudly or confronting someone. It was about persistence, clarity, and acting with honesty even when it was uncomfortable. She understood that being a witness carried a responsibility far greater than she had imagined. The lessons she had learned would guide her in the years to come, shaping the choices she made, the words she spoke, and the way she treated others. That evening she walked toward the ranch. Mr. Dalton was working near the pens, repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. When he saw her approaching, he paused and nodded. Leela felt a sense of calm. She realized that confrontation had brought understanding, and understanding had brought reflection. "Mr. Dalton," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you." He looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" he asked. "For listening," she replied. "For thinking about what I said. For caring enough to reflect. It means a lot." The rancher's expression softened. "You've got a sharp mind," he said quietly. "You've reminded me that seeing is only the first step. Responsibility comes next. Not everyone learns that, but you have." Leela smiled, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She understood that gratitude and acknowledgement were as important as courage and confrontation. Change, after all, was a process, not an instant result. In the days that followed, Leela noticed the subtle ways the community continued to grow. People were kinder, more aware, and more willing to consider the consequences of their actions. Workers at the ranch treated each other and the animals with greater care. Parents talked to their children about observation, honesty, and accountability. The town, once quiet and ordinary, now held a deeper understanding of responsibility. Leela realized that even small voices could inspire change when they spoke the truth with courage. She spent time reflecting on the lessons she had learned. That seeing was not enough. One had to understand and act. That courage was not just about confrontation, it was about persistence and clarity. That responsibility extended beyond oneself to the wider community. And that even those who seemed unshakable, like Mr. Dalton, could grow when reminded of the power of truth and accountability. One evening, as Leela walked along a familiar trail, she noticed the calf grazing peacefully near the cliffs. Its small legs moved carefully, confident and unafraid. She felt a wave of relief and understanding. The animal had survived, but more importantly, the moment had left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Leela realized that life often presented challenges that tested courage, observation, and honesty, but facing them could lead to growth and understanding. Later that night, she sat on her porch with her grandmother, watching the desert sky fill with stars. The vastness of the landscape reminded her that the world was full of moments, some small, some large, where truth and courage mattered. Her grandmother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've learned a valuable lesson," she said. "Not just about responsibility, but about how one voice can matter." Leela nodded. She understood that courage was quiet, powerful, and enduring. It did not always create immediate results, but its impact could shape people, communities, and even the land itself. As the weeks passed, life in the town returned to a rhythm, but the lessons remained. Leela continued to explore the desert, her steps confident and her eyes alert. She paid attention to small details, noticing the way the wind moved through the trees, how animals interacted, and the way people carried themselves. Every observation reminded her of the importance of awareness and responsibility. She also realized that courage was not a single act but a series of decisions made every day, in small moments that added up to something greater. Mr. Dalton, too, continued to reflect quietly. Though he had initially insisted he only helped, he began to accept the importance of accountability. He spoke with workers about careful observation and thoughtfulness. He treated the animals with renewed attention, understanding that even well-intended actions carried consequences. Leela noticed these changes with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She understood that courage and truth could inspire growth not just in herself, but in others as well. In the final reflection of the story, Leela realized that life was full of moments that tested observation, courage, and responsibility. The incident with the calf had been a small but powerful event that taught her about the importance of seeing clearly, acting honestly, and speaking up when necessary. She understood that responsibility was not just about avoiding mistakes, but about learning from them and ensuring that truth and care guided every choice. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a reminder that life continued with both challenges and lessons. Leela felt a quiet confidence that she could face whatever came next. She had learned to trust her observations, to act with courage, and to insist on accountability. And she knew that the lessons of the past would guide her through the days to come, shaping her choices, her relationships, and the way she approached the world. Looking toward the cliffs one last time, Leela felt a deep connection to the land, the town, and the lessons she had learned. She knew that the moment with the calf, the confrontation with Mr. Dalton, and the community's reflection were not isolated events. They were part of her growth, part of the story of the town, and part of the way the desert itself seemed to teach patience, observation, and courage. She smiled quietly, knowing that life would continue to bring challenges, but that she was ready to meet them with honesty, bravery, and awareness.